asking for advice, it's free. Advice and unsolicited opinions are free. And you can take and leave anything that people tell you. And for me, it wasn't until I developed this relationship with a couple of my professors by asking them for advice and then hearing what they said and then applying it. So I'm currently an assistant professor. I'm in my 6th year of this job at James Madison University, and I'm a professor in the biology department. So I consider myself a biologist broadly, and I have multiple degrees in biology. Technically, all of my degrees are in zoology because I was majoring in something that existed. It doesn't exist as a degree anymore because we've changed the vernacular. It doesn't mean that you can't still have a passion for animals and understanding their biology and still get a degree in biology. That's still completely accessible. It just has a different name. I identify as a cisgender gay man, and also as white, which I would say, in 2021, I think that I've thought a lot about, white identity and how that intersects with the way that I engage with anyone. And so I've thought a lot about sort of my upbringing and all of that. So it's interesting to now kind of think about it in a new way. So I am an Arkansan by birth. I was born and raised in the South. Arkansas is definitely in the South. This is a point of contention among deep Southerners, people from Georgia, Alabama. So I grew up in southwestern Arkansas in a town of about 6,000 people. And at the time, it was barely pushing 5,000 people, predominantly white. There were some Mexican-American families in town, and there, might be one Black person, but not necessarily a Black family. So I also grew up in a very racist area of the country. So racism was something that was normalized. It was something that, of course, people are racist and sort of tacitly tolerated, but not necessarily performative. It wasn't something you had to engage in to survive in the South and where I grew up. So thinking about racism and also homophobia, I grew up around very, very deep and reactive homophobia. You had to actively reject the idea of people being queer. That was very important. I grew up in a Catholic household. We were a minority religion in my town. I know that sounds kind of weird, but we were very marginalized because of that. We couldn't talk about special church events, religious holidays that we were focused on. And by holiday, I just mean a, spiritual celebration that was going on at the time. And never mind the fact that you felt othered, because most people where I grew up were Protestant. And so there was a sharp divide between how we interpreted, Christianity. And I was always an outlier in that way. Never mind struggling internally with my gay identity. Yeah, so that's basically how I grew up. Both of my parents were teachers. So my dad was a middle school science and math teacher, primarily math. And then my mother was an English and French teacher in the high school. So 2 very different parenting styles based on just the fact that one is in the humanities and one is in the sciences. The sciences won in terms of their influence over me, but I always held on to my passion and appreciation for the humanities. I married a French professor, French and Italian professor. So, this is something that is always valuable to me. And I knew that I wanted to be a teacher from very early age. I just didn't know what kind of teacher I wanted to be. And I always sort of aspired to collegiate level teaching. I used to play professor with my cousin whenever we would hang out. Not surprising anyone who knows me, that was something I loved to act out. Patent extrovert. So I would definitely say that those things sort of come together to create a sense of who I was then. And again, anytime I get asked about my queer identity and like my path through self-discovery, which I would say is the basis for being queer, is it's really about self-discovery. That process was pretty much impossible, even though during puberty, that's when it's really coming into clarity. You realize that you're not wired the same way that your friends are. The things that your friends talk about in terms of being sexually interesting, for example, is just something that I had to perform, which I could. I had plenty of girlfriends. I was, just as active as any of my friends. And it felt like something I had to do. Like I had to do this if I'm going to remain relevant to my peers. And so I think that that was one of the major pressures that I had. I will also admit to coercing peers into sexual activity, because that was something that was very performative and part of growing up, queer in an environment where I couldn't have queer interactions. So saying, hey, let's try this, things like that. And so that explorative phase was one where I probably hurt other people unintentionally and, unbeknownst to myself at the time, but something that I think a lot of people fail to acknowledge. But nowadays we see a lot of really important acknowledgement of the harm that, for instance, gay men cause to one another through the process of ownership of their sexuality. And I think that there's a massive issue associated with consent and what that means. And so when I reflect back on my interactions with heterosexual sex, that's something I have a lot of deep conflict about, because it's hard. That's a hard thing to resolve, because you were young, didn't know what you were doing, and yet convinced other people to do things with you that you probably shouldn't have. You probably shouldn't have been, but it's youth. You're all underage. You don't know what you're doing. You're not experienced. There are plenty of ways to, I think, hand wave that away. Yet at the same time, it's still not good. And so, that's something I always carry with me whenever I think about mentoring the next generation of queer people. And what that means is like atoning for, your own shortcomings and really deeply analyzing what happened to you and why you were like that. I grew up in a very abusive household psychologically. So my dad was a patent alcoholic. That was who he was for the majority of my upbringing. Which led to a lot of chaos in my environment at home, unpredictable. So you would come home, you didn't know what the situation was. You didn't know how quickly things would escalate into irrational anger and lashing out and things like that. Never physically abusive, but I do think the mental abuse is not insignificant. And then having to resolve the role that my mother played in all of this because of her enabling. And then this hostile kind of environment, an unpredictable environment, is not one in which someone could easily come out. That's not going to be a situation where, hey, let's talk about the fact that I'm attracted to guys now, right? I was extremely gay whenever I was in middle school. I spent a lot of time practicing things like baton twirling and flag line. And like, I was it. And I was the one, of course, who would be watching a girl, getting ready to try out for middle school majorette or whatever. I would be the one to snatch the baton from them and be like, no, it's not like that. It's like this. Again, surprising no one who knows me. That's definitely not a surprise. And I remember in 8th grade, I had developed the courage to try out for Flagline. I was going to do it. I was really trying to own that skill. I knew that I had that skill, and I was like, I can do this, and I know that I'll be good at it. I am going to do this despite the norm. And the norm was definitely, this is only for women. And 8th grade is obviously like real intense period of puberty, like that is when you're really changing. And in my case, really developing masculine characteristics, and like you're growing in ways that you're not comfortable with. And that just becomes a situation. And I decided not to do sports. I was like, this is not for me. I don't want to mess my face up. I don't want to get hurt, right? I mean, like, I don't want any of that. Listen, if I could have been a swimmer, if that had been an option, that's the kind of sport I would have loved to do, because I love to swim, still do. I love that. I could have easily taken to that. But the idea of, like, impact sports where you're like around other people and they're physically trying to hurt you, I'm like, why would I want to do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. So anyway, and I was practicing for my tryout. I had really worked hard on the song I was going to do and exactly what my routine would look like. And I was really proud. And my mother caught wind that I was going to try out and put an end to it immediately. You will not be doing anything that will embarrass this family. And so that was that. Fast forward to when I came out, same situation. I'd prefer if you didn't share any family secrets at Thanksgiving this year. I'd say that my experience is not unique. I think that that's something I would love for young queer people to understand, especially young gay men. I don't want to minimize the fact that growing up as a gay man in the United States in 2021 can be just as difficult as it was back in the 90s. I mean, if not before that. So I really do not like that we can't also acknowledge the challenges faced by people in the queer community. They come in all shapes and sizes and varieties, and gay men are part of that. And I think that's still important today. I feel that we aren't as, our paths and processes aren't as visible as they used to be. And that's something that I have a hard time resolving, because on the other hand, I think that marginalized queer people, such as trans people, they have not been able to be at the same table for the longest time. And so that gives me a lot of pause, because I'm like, well, for instance, when I saw this opportunity to be able to talk about my story, I was like, should I ask for a seat at this table? And I had conflict about it. I was like, oh, maybe my voice doesn't matter. Maybe I shouldn't. But then I checked it and I said, no, what would I have wanted whenever I was, thinking about a STEM career? What I need to see people who I can identify with so that I know that I have access. That to me is what tipped the balance. I was like, I'm going to ask to be part of this, because I just don't think that we are still represented in STEM. I think that that's still an issue. It was a major issue for me in college. I didn't see myself in any of my professors, because so what I did is I maintained my heteronormative performative stuff. I maintained the status quo. They expect me to be straight, so I'll just allow them to have that assumption about me. So I wasn't myself, right? And I remember when I came out to my honors advisor, my research advisor, and pretty much my career advisor at this point. He and I talk about career stuff anytime we get to communicate. And I remember he said to me, he's cis, white, straight guy, standard in academia. Of course, he's a professor, right? But he had a hard row in getting access. He was not born into it. But by virtue of who he was as a person in America, of course, he gained access. They didn't question his ability to be an authority, for example. I remember when I came out to him, and he was mad. He was mad, not because I was gay. He was mad because I didn't trust him enough to tell him. I was afraid, and rightfully so. It is a very risky thing to come out to someone who's in a position of power over you. I don't know you well enough to know if you're going to have retribution, if you're going to seek retribution against me. I don't know if you're secretly religious and a super Protestant evangelical Christian who is going to tell me that I'm going to hell and then go out of your way to try to save me, which is essentially what happened to my best friend growing up. He turned against me as soon as he found out that I was queer. That was, and the end of that relation. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to back up. My lifetime best friend at the moment, whenever I was in puberty, I was about to go into ninth grade, when he found out that I was Catholic and was not Protestant, he discriminated against me, and said, we can't be friends unless you're willing to convert to my religion and go to my church. This was someone I was 100% in love with. He was the first man I fell in love with. I was truly committed to him. Yeah, that was ninth grade. I had just joined the high school band. It was a huge moment. I was a huge band nerd, of course. And he was my idol. Like I really worshiped him in every way. He was just the model man to me. And I was like, if I can end up like that, if I can be that smart, that good at playing the trombone, that was my instrument. If I can do all of those things and be a good person, he was a good person. And then to have that person reject you because of your religion, turned out that was a really important training moment for me, in preparing myself for the ways that people would reject me because of my queerness. So life has a funny way of working out. So I got shattered. That shattered me for years. It deeply, deeply damaged me. And I've actually not really talked about it. So this is kind of odd that it even just came up, but I rarely get a chance to talk about my queerness and its sort of evolution. So I think seeing queer people as people and their uniqueness is crucial for young people, especially because it's very easy to feel isolated and not represented. So what I felt and the isolation that my family had because of our Catholic, identity, is that, or Catholic practice, I should say, is that I think it enabled my family to also isolate from the community so that my dad's alcoholism was not known or wasn't a widely available piece of information. My parents as teachers, or were seen as, valuable members of the community. They had reputations for being good teachers, strict, et cetera, and so the idea that that was our biggest kind of flaw, I think the Catholic isolation enabled the alcoholism to not be known, and therefore the trauma that's occurring in an alcoholic family becomes private, and the privatization, I think, is a huge thing that prevents queer people in small rural communities from being able to be themselves, because they don't get to own their truth. They don't get to own who they are because the retribution is in-house, and that is where you live. This is what you have access to, and the only way out is severe, would be running away, which I had considered like many times, but I didn't know anyone. I'm like, where was I going to go? I don't want to be homeless. Like, I can't do that. I also want to say that, the degree of marginalization that I can look back on and understand as that pales in comparison to, for instance, if we were a Black family. If we were a Black family living where we lived, we would have moved. I mean, we just would have had to move. And so understanding that, I felt like I didn't have any options because I didn't feel that I had any control or any power. And so I think that the powerlessness is something I can see in young people, that they feel that way. And ultimately, the thing that I'm most concerned with young queer people is suicide, and what can cause people to lose hope in a future. And I get it. I understand it. And I'm not going to tell you to not be suicidal. I'm going to tell those people that what you're feeling is valid and it's hard. And I would just ask or plead with you to talk to somebody, because I think that frame of reference is huge. Getting perspective is huge, and it could make the difference for you. But your feelings of depression, your feelings of lack of worth, are completely understandable. it makes sense. And I want you to know that it's not fantasy in your mind. It's that these are the products of the way that mainstream society is organized to make us feel that way. And so I just want you to know that, reach out to somebody, talk to somebody, call a hotline. Those people are awesome. Or try to contact people. Look me up. If you're listening to this, look me up. I'm easy to find. I'd love to get an email from you and we can set up a phone call. I'm happy to do any of that. People are listening and curious about biology and pursuing a career in this path. You can look at topics like cell and molecular biology, evolutionary biology, ecological biology, or what I tend to refer to as integrative biology, or understanding the whole way that organisms are built. So sort of soup to nuts, like what makes them work and tick. Within integrative biology, we really think of topics like physiology. I'm technically a comparative physiologist. I understand the ways that animals are using mechanisms in their bodies to cause something to happen. So I specialize in chemical communication, which most people understand as pheromones, meaning that animals release chemicals and those chemicals tell the receiver about them. It gives information. And I study chemical ecology in a reproduction context. So again, I've started very broadly and I'm trying to chip away the layers to let you understand that I'm very specialized within biology. And this is pretty standard. Most biologists who are in a university setting are pretty specialized. For example, I have a colleague who is also queer, and her area of expertise is in not developmental genetics, but essentially experimental genetics. So what she does is she actually manipulates the genome of flies and then looks to see what happens when you delete genes. So if you prevent them from being able to do this, what does it cause on the part of the animal's biology? And so, like me, she's fascinated with animals, and that's what got her hooked in biology. But she was more interested in what's happening at the level of the nucleus and the way that the cells use DNA. I, as a young biologist, was not interested in that. I was interested in animals as they function. So what makes, the leg move? How is the leg being commanded to do that? And then I took a class in physiology and I was like, oh my God, everything makes sense. The reason being that, physiology as a field takes physical science like physics, chemistry, and then also mathematics, and it puts them into a realistic context in an organism. And I was like, I had no idea this was a thing. And so whenever I realized that people could use equations to understand the way that a cell changes when it gets shocked with electricity, for example, I was like, what? This is fascinating, right? This is so cool. And it continues to be a pattern I see in the next generation of scientists that I teach. I bring this up from the beginning. I'm like, this is why physiology is so fascinating. You can see I'm getting really animated talking about it because I can't help myself. It's like a guilty pleasure. So that's sort of why I got passionate about biology, was whenever I first really got introduced to physiology in undergrad. So in my first 4 years of post high school education. But before I even got into college, for four-year university, I took the opportunity to take community college classes as a high school student. This was daunting and felt like guaranteed failure. I remember when the opportunity was coming up to start my college classes, my community college classes, as a high school student, I remember being thrilled and terrified because I knew that in high school I had been raised in a bubble. I knew that. And the community college felt like my first real opportunity for true failure. And that's where I was. I was really, really concerned that it just wasn't going to work out. And then facing my parents' disappointment, that was another thing I was really, really afraid of. That was a constant narrative, was what are my parents going to think? And seeking their approval was the reason that I never came out to them in high school. I mean, I knew that they would be disappointed and I didn't want to face it. So it's best to just omit it. Um, and I will also add that I knew my identity. I knew that I was a gay guy. I knew it. I just kept it private because that was the party line. If you're gay, you just keep it to yourself. Not because anyone I knew was gay, but because any of the people in the community, people who had graduated, people that had moved here from other places, oh, they're gay, we don't talk about it. I was like, so noted. Community college was a really awesome entry point to understanding what all was really out there. High school is more of a perpetuation of norms, educational norms. But I actually had some phenomenal high school educators. I had remarkable English teachers, for example, that really taught us how to write well. And that is a skill set that stays with me to this day. And I can't emphasize that enough, that learning how to write was transformative. I also got to be on a newspaper in high school, and that taught me all of the critical skills I needed for scientific writing. I had no idea. But scientific writing, so any STEM publication that people who do research write and publish, is exactly written in journalistic style. They are one and the same. It is spendthrift, it is succinct and analytical. You are really putting together facts. It is about fact searching and finding and articulating what is known to a novel audience, and putting together seemingly disparate pieces of information into a cohesive narrative. That's exactly what journalists do all the time. Like the best journalists, that's what they do. So fast forward to 2021 and seeing in 2020 and 2019 and 2018 and 2017, and you see this attack on truth in writing, debasing, the intellectual pyramid of knowledge that we all agree is the standard for presenting information, journalism and scientific, discovery. And dumbfounded, to say the least, stunned, right? Stunned by the level of ignorance that exists now, that has seemingly equal purchase, in discourse, which is just unbelievable. It makes it very hard to encourage the next generation to pursue science because it's being debased by ignorant people. And these people are ignorant. There is no argument against that. Turns out that's what happens when you systematically defund education in the country. That's been happening for 50 plus years. And that's what has caused a lack of students pursuing STEM. I mean, it's just, there has been a lack of significant growth in the US in STEM training because of this just full-blown ignorance that's been happening. And so queer, STEM interested, and journalism, like these things came together for me to make me feel incorrectly that I was on my own. And so in community college, I got exposure to difficult courses like English composition. And through that, I learned that I had skill sets that other people didn't have. So looking within and getting validation for your skills, I think is, that is a nugget that I think queer people are historically, they historically inherit. Fran Lebowitz is a great example. She knew what her skills were and stuck with them. And I think that figuring that out for yourself is what determines whether you are really suited to a career in, let's say, biology versus mathematics. And for me, that pathway to self-discovery about my skills really occurred when I got access to community colleges. And I think it's because in high school, especially in a small rural environment, your educators are typically with you for multiple years of your life. They become biased. It's inevitable. Community college, they don't know who you are. The only thing they know is what you put on a piece of paper, what you turn in. And so it's a chance for you to reinvent yourself. And I think that that's another great thing about college environments. You get to be who you want to be. You get to set your own standards, your own impressions, your own brand, to use a current term. You brand yourself from the first moment you start your courses. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't transfer from one semester to another. You have a bad semester, it doesn't matter. Next semester, you've got new professors, new classmates, typically, like, you get to just work on it again. And so I think that this entrepreneurial spirit that the current generation have, college is the perfect environment for this, because this is a chance for you to rebrand yourself as you see fit until you get the perfect cocktail of things that is going to make you successful and help you develop your own career path. I have multiple degrees in biology. I got my undergraduate degree in zoology. So I have a Bachelor of Science. I accumulated a lot of community college credits whenever I was a high school student, and probably could have gotten an associate's degree in biology if I had pursued that, but I was really eyes on getting out of where I grew up. That was really the purpose. It wasn't because I had any kind of condescending view of an associate's degree. It was just that that's not going to help me get my four-year degree in terms of the way that I view the world. And so I was like, I'm going to go. Also, I was very hung up on the stricture of how I perceived access to a career at a university, which was, you have to do a bachelor's degree that must take 4 years. You then have to do a master's degree, which takes 2 years. And then you have to do a PhD, which is at least 4 years. So I knew I was signing up for that kind of trajectory. I thought that was it, that was the only way. I had learned this by actually reading books about science, and about marine biology, because that's what I ultimately wanted to do. I wanted to be a marine biologist. And here I am studying snake sex, right? Close enough. But I will say that the process of getting my degrees helped me mature as a scientist. They helped me mature as a person, and they helped me gain a crystal clear view of my identity as a queer person. Where am I in the queer community? What can I do? And how can I turn this into, or fold it into, my career? Invaluable. I would not change a single thing that I did in terms of how I pursued these options, because I learned so much about myself through all of it. So I did 4 years at University of Arkansas, and then I applied to master's programs because I didn't think that I could get into a PhD if I didn't have a master's. I thought that you had to do that. Wrong. You can go directly into your PhD from undergrad. You can also go right to starting a PhD without an undergraduate degree. I mean, if you show the ability, you can go right to starting a PhD. Yeah, there are plenty of young, phenomenal people who pass all of the standards that are necessary to begin a PhD, and they don't have undergraduate degrees. So, I mean, it's out there. So if you are one of these phenomenal people, I applaud you. I don't understand what it's like to be that smart. I never will. And I think that's incredible. And I would love to see young queer people being at the forefront of this next generation of people that just go straight into a PhD. That's fantastic. To be that gifted would be, really remarkable. I also think that it's going to take truly gifted scientists to pull us out of the climate crisis. I think that that's ultimately what it's going to hinge on. It'll be invention on the part of this next generation. So we'll see. I do think that, so that was a misconception that I had to do a master's degree. So I applied to master's programs as a senior, and I interviewed at one place. I only got one interview, and that was at Washington State University in eastern Washington state, so out in what's called the Palouse, very isolated agricultural area, so conservative, but with a really rich Catholic population, so familiar to me, right? I was still very Catholic when I was an undergraduate, and then I took that with me to Washington State. I came out in the junior year of college, so fall of my junior year. I was about to turn 21, etc. I'll fast forward through that because my entry into, gay life was standard nightclubs, drag shows, all that stuff. My first serious relationship was with a drag queen, someone who did drag, I should say. It's not that he lived as a drag queen. It was just, that was part of what he did. And that whole experience merged the things that I thought I wanted to hold on to. So what I mean by that is I thought I wanted to remain Catholic and still be openly gay. I knew that that's what I needed to be happy, that this is what my happiness looked like. So I dated someone who had similar desires to be able to be nonchalant about their gayness and to be able to still be Catholic and participate in all of the ritual and routine of being Catholic. The deep family connections that are formed through religion that are beautiful, and they can be really positive and comforting. It's something I still miss as an atheist. I just miss it because it's extremely comforting. There's nothing quite like the feeling that I would kind of work myself into through the process of deep meditation, which occurs in a lot of Catholic services. You end up in this very deep meditative state. They never describe it as deep meditation, but that's essentially what it is. Talk about finding true inner peace and being very comforted by yourself and just the sense of quiet. It's beautiful. And no one ever told me that that was something I was doing myself. That is within you. This is something that you can do. No one else is giving that to you. This is something that is truly coming from within. And I think that that's something I would hope that, young queer people can really think about, is that this is, the power is within you. You can do this for yourself, and you can make this happen for yourself. You don't have to rely on anyone else to do it for you. And so we had this relationship, and then I told him, I was like, but I'm going to move away to do a master's degree because I'm serious about my career. I want to do this for my career. In undergraduate, I was surrounded by people who were obsessed with going to med school. These were the people who were the best in my classes. These were the people that I could study with, that I could learn from. And they were my inner circle. I had to actually end my friendship with one of them because at the time of our conflict as friends, which happened much later in life, they supported the Catholic Church during the sex abuse sort of revelations that came out. They posted something in social media aligning with that, and I told them directly, I said, I cannot be associated with someone like you if you're going to espouse relationships with the church over people's lives. I said, that is just not okay. You cannot, this is something I can't accept. And so that ended. And obviously they had no regrets about their stance either. So that is finished. But this was someone who was in my inner circle, and someone that I leaned on very hard so that we could both accomplish our goals of being the best, in our respective career paths. And I broke up with my boyfriend because the time had come for me to move away. That was very difficult. In some ways, I regret being absolutist. So I tend to skew toward black and white. Things are either right or they're wrong, and that's it. Not allowing for any degree of nuance, especially then. And that's very unkind. People are complicated. and situations are complicated, and there can be limitless solutions to a given problem. There is not only one. So fast forward to being a master's student in Eastern Washington, and the fact that I chose to go back into the closet. I thought it would be professionally damaging for me to be out as a queer person in a new environment. I didn't know. I received some negative blowback from people in the program because of my accent. People actually made fun of me and alluded, but did not directly say things that, to indicate that I wasn't intelligent because of my accent. That was really difficult. I thought that we were peers, and so to have people mock me was difficult, but it made me want to prove them wrong. And I will tell you that I can really dig my heels in whenever it comes down to showing someone that I have value. And I think that that's a really important trait in queer people, is setting your stance, being confident, and not giving up. You have to make sure that the truth is heard. Articulating truth is crucial. This is a really important thing to do that queer people are responsible for. We're responsible for voicing our truth. We cannot rely on allies to do that for us. Mostly because a lot of allies get it wrong, and you've got to learn to speak the truth yourself. It's very crucial. And I'm not going to be the best ally for a trans person compared to a trans person, right? A trans person is going to represent their needs to their ability compared to me. A bisexual person is going to talk about bisexual erasure in ways that I, as an ally to bisex people, can't, right? I can't do the best job. So learning that stuff actually didn't happen for me until I was a PhD student. So I'd gone back in the closet as a master's student, and that had a very severe consequence, which was that on my 23rd birthday, I had broken up with the girlfriend I had at the time. I had met this girl. She was amazing. She was in my program, super smart, beautiful, kind, hilarious, and family oriented, wanted to have kids, wanted to settle down and start a life, and just wicked good at being a biologist. I mean, I was like, woof, she makes me look bad, right? That's the kind of person you want to partner with. You want to partner with someone who's going to push you and going to make you be better and make you really strive. And that's who she was, and still is to this day. She and I are still friends. And I had been upfront. I dated guys in college. I have some aspect of me that's attracted to men, but I'm working on that. I was trying. I swear, hand to God, I was trying. But it's innate. It's who I am. I am a gay man. That's just who I am. And when we broke up, it was really difficult. But I told her, I was like, I just cannot resolve this. And she said, I know that you can. I can tell. And to be given that kindness by someone, it makes me really emotional just thinking about it, because I don't believe in God. That's just not who I am. But that's the closest to godliness that I've seen in someone. Yeah. Because she wasn't going to turn away from me. She didn't reject me. And I think that that's ultimately what saved me in a lot of ways. Just to have that one person. I had one person who was willing to hold on to me as a person and not reject me. I had physically moved away from everything that I knew, everything, thousands of miles away. And so to have that one person was just really remarkable, even after we'd broken up. So we broke up. I needed to go be among the gays. I was like, I have to go on a pilgrimage. So I drove up to Spokane, which is an hour and a half away, went to a gay bar. Familiar, comfortable, I'm down with this. I was a drinker at the time. I'm sober. I've been sober for almost 2 years now. But at the time I was really into drinking, and I got wasted at a gay bar, and I mean blackout drunk. Slept with a couple of guys in the same night. That's how destitute I really was. I was like really needing that affirmation, and was not smart about it. It was super stupid. And then I drove home. I got in the car, again, blackout drunk. The second guy was trying really hard to not let me go. He was like, I really think you need to just stay the night. No, I'm fine. Everything's going to be fine. I passed out while I was going about 80 miles an hour. And I hit the support for an overpass, and broke my jaw, had a contusion, and had my jaws wired shut for weeks afterward. Faced, criminal charges, as I should have. I am really disgusted with the fact that it all happened the way that it did, because of the harm that I put other people in the way of. That selfishness is something I have a really hard time forgiving myself for. And my parents couldn't help me financially. It was really hard for them. The ambulance bill alone was astronomically huge. I remember getting that bill and being like, how am I supposed to pay for this? Like, this is the largest amount of money I've ever seen in my life. I don't know what this is. My parents did help me, thankfully. They didn't know all of the circumstances surrounding it. And my friend, my ex-girlfriend at the time, she helped me. She came, she took care of me. She didn't judge me. And, how do you repay someone for something like that? Like, I mean, I don't even know. So I'm glad that I got to share that story, because I think that this is something that people would never expect. They see, Dr. Parker, put together, he's a professor, he does all this stuff and all this outreach, and, he's openly gay. That must be hard for him to do, blah, blah. I'm like, for me, I have to do that. I have to be out in my classrooms, because I wonder, what if all the time? What if I had a queer person in my life that I could see and somehow identify with? How could my life have been different? I don't know. Would I have still made those decisions? Would I have gone down the alcohol spiral that I did throughout my 20s and 30s? I mean, I was a hefty drinker for 20 years of my life, because that was normal. That was the queer community that I grew up around. That was the academic world that I was in. Everybody in academia that I knew drank like a fish. And everyone laughs it off like it's not a big deal. It's a huge deal. It affects everything about your mental well-being. And this is just something that I'm hoping it'll resonate with someone out there, that they'll hear this and realize, I've never thought to question the alcohol that is innate to the community in which I live, or the career path that I find myself on. I erroneously interpreted being on my own, because of where I was and what I had experienced. Come to find out, I actually could have relied on more senior people within our major and asked them for advice. The thing about advice is, whenever they give it to you, you can't just assess it and whether it's good or not, because you don't have experience, right? The older you get, you can now start assessing who's good at giving advice and who's not. But whenever you're young and inexperienced, especially professionally, you don't even know. And so how do you make that decision? You can look at successful people and you can see what advice they have. That's one model. Or you can develop a mentor relationship with someone. And for me, that's what I chose to do. I was like, I really think that you're a great teacher, right? That's something I knew how to assess. I feel challenged by you, and that's what I want. I want to feel challenged. I want the bar to be high. I respond to that. And I don't want you to worry about my feelings. That's how I was. I don't want you to be afraid of telling me the truth. I want to hear the truth so that I can deal with it. As hard as that can be, it can be really hard to hear the truth. For instance, to have someone tell me, you know, I don't think that you're really understanding this. Here's what I think you need to work on. That's tough to hear, right? But that's crucial. How are you supposed to grow and change if you can't receive criticism? So I would say that I think that's very, very vital. I think that, in STEAM, there's a lot of competition, and it's populated with people who want to do better than you. And so that is something to be very well aware of if you're going to enter into STEAM, is there are people in here that will make it somewhat toxic, and you have to recognize that on the surface and then figure out a way to filter those people out, or let it drive you to be better. I thrive with competition in academic settings. If I have someone who's a peer, and if I can try to keep up with them, that helps me raise my standards, which is great. My access point to an academic career, because that's ultimately what I am, and I'm an academic practitioner of STEAM, is I did research as an undergraduate. So people interested in pursuing any level of academic biology, whether that is, I should say, academic science, whether that is being a professor, whether that is teaching at a community college, whether that is becoming a nuclear researcher at NASA, whether that is developing your own patents so that you can be a scientific inventor. Those are all very different pathways. They all go through the undergraduate curriculum. And the majority of those people who become successful did research in some kind of capacity through mentorship. So it has to be mentored research, not some independent thing that you're just doing on your own without feedback. Feedback in the process of scientific enterprise is the lifeblood. You have to have people weighing in on whether or not you're following the scientific protocol, which we call the scientific method. Are you accurately doing that? You require criticism and feedback to understand that. So I will just definitely say that those research experiences that I had as an undergraduate gave me the access I needed because they trained me in skills I didn't have. So I would say the skill building you get from doing research and having an authentic research experience is what helps you know whether this is a good fit for you or not. So a lot of students think that it's about success and failure in terms of your project. Your project either worked or it didn't. That's not true at all. You just have to do it well. If you follow the procedure, if you go through the scientific method of inquiry, testing, assessment of results, and then redesign, if you can do that, you have opened up a world of possibilities for yourself career-wise, because it shows that you can think through problem solving. And I would say that anybody who considers themselves a practitioner in STEAM would say that that is inherent to what they do and how they think, is I go through the scientific method. This is how I work. This is how I operate. I went through a revolution as a PhD student, primarily because I got access to a wickedly good queer community. I was part of the Rainbow Continuum at Oregon State University. This was the queer group on campus that was very proactive. These were people who were out there challenging administration, asking for a seat at the table, asking for resources, and not taking no for an answer, and not allowing administrators to equivocate. I had never seen anything like that. People challenging the system and saying, you don't work. We don't work for you. You work for us. My God. And these people were like undergrads, and they were just like fire starters. I couldn't believe it. And, I'm from the South. Like, we don't do that, right? That's no, right? You say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, and that's it, right? And while there's an important aspect of respect in that mentality, it allows systems of oppression to persist. You can't have both. It's too hard. And so this real radical queerness was something I hadn't experienced personally. And I was very resistant to it. I was like, ugh, this is really uncomfortable. But then I saw the beauty in their queer identities. These people were unlike anyone else I had been around. And my God, it changed me in all of the best ways. I learned how to be more assertive in my realms of academia. These people in the Rainbow Continuum were the reason that I'm able to out myself to every class I ever teach. It's in my syllabus. I talk about my identity. I talk about it whenever I introduce myself in symposia, at conferences, etc. Like, this is part of who I am, and it's going to be on the table right when we talk. And the reason for this is because I think STEM, and I don't want to include the arts here because really I don't think the arts have the same problems that STEM does in terms of putting queerness up front. And that's what we have to start doing. I think it's very, very important. And so in a lot of ways in my job, I have really started putting pressure on the systems and asking for representation, asking for quantification, count us, put us in the census, all of these things. This is stuff that is really missing in the US right now, at every level. You think about companies. Most tech companies don't have pro-LGBT policies. They don't have policies that even include them, that talk about, challenges for LGBT employees. Like, do you have access to PrEP and PEP? Like, is that even part of your, it's just really frustrating. So through this transformation of my queer lens, I'm able to turn that into real action and to motivate me to always recognize my shortcomings when it comes to being a queer advocate. I do a lot of work with groups for people of color. For instance, I'm one of the faculty sponsors for the Students of Color organization at my job. I made horrible assumptions about the skill set you learn as a queer person being directly transferable. It's not. You have to learn when you work with other people who experience completely different levels and histories of marginalization. It's like, I can't use a whole lot of my experience to help guide any of this. So instead, I focused on learning things like decentering. Like, okay, it's not about me. This has nothing to do with me personally. I need to just listen to what people need, figure out a way to do it. If I can't do that, I've got to find someone who can help me with that. And it's not these people's responsibility. It's not this group's responsibility. And that is a work in progress that'll be with me until I die. That's just something that I'm always going to have to work on. Conversely, as a queer person, I tend not to focus on gay men in the community and working with them only. I tend to look beyond my identity and try to focus on people who feel pretty marginalized to me and stress marginalization within the queer community. There are lots of queer people of color who are experiencing multiple dimensions of oppression and challenge that I will never face. And so acknowledging and listening is what I spend a lot of time doing now, rather than trying to fix. This is something that I'm innately wired to do, is problem solve. But most often, people want to be heard. And then to see something change at a larger level. So I'm using my skills and my connections to be able to change things at a system level based on what I hear. And so I don't make it the work of marginalized people, especially URMs, to people with URM identities. Like, I don't make it their work. I figure out what I can do to carry some of the burden as I can. Complicated. There's a lot of this going on in STEAM. So every discipline within STEAM appears to be approaching this differently too. So the ways that computer science is approaching inclusive issues within their discipline is very different and a lot of people came to the table at the same time. So for instance, trans people in tech education have very different goals and foci than non-trans people of color in tech. So these problems tend to be very different that they bring to the table. And finding the overlap so you get a more optimal solution can feel like downplaying their needs rather than addressing both groups fully. Just do it, right? Which would be what I would call the more radical approach, which is just, you have to deal with both, deal with it. That's your problem now, figure out how to fix it. I think scientists especially are prone to optimization, finding the thing that requires the least amount of energy. And I understand that. But the balance between making systemic problems worse by not fully addressing the challenges and problems brought to you, that's a really risky gamble. Because then you offer something that's very low. You're giving them a devalued response or a deprioritized response. And so, yeah, there's a lot out there. And the more I get involved, the more problems I see associated with the systems within STEAM and higher education. And it can feel a little bit overwhelming because sometimes I feel like I can't contribute as much as I thought that I could. So that's where I am right now. Career-wise, things are great. Like I don't have any, I wish I had more time to work on research, but I'm at a predominantly undergraduate institution that focuses on teaching more so than research. And that's just where I am. So there are ways to make your career be as close to your optimal as possible in higher education. It takes a lot of dedication and energy. I don't have kids. I don't have multiple partners. So for instance, if I had multiple partners, in a polyamorous relationship and trying to figure out how to optimize my career, that could be really challenging, but I have a single partner. And so because of that, I'm afforded a lot of latitude in how I shape my career, and there's only time for so much. So I tend to default to service within my academic career and service for people of color and within STEM and queer people within STEM. And unfortunately, usually in that order, mostly because those are the opportunities that came up first, were to work with students of color. So I agreed to do it. I was motivated at the time, and it actually happened last year before the protests against police brutality, which was impeccable timing. I'm happy that we had the org, but I wasn't able to give them the best support that I could because I wasn't far enough along in my training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how best to do that? What are best practices? I wasn't in a position to be able to help them as much as I could have. And for anybody out there who's considers themselves an ally to communities of color, you have a lot of work you have to do before you're able to be an effective ally and resource. Just being present is literally the first step, and it doesn't really help that much. But that's the first painful step, is moving your needs and time out of the way to make room for someone who is having a hard time in America. I mean, I think that white people really never understand what it's like to be a person of color in the US. And it's impossible for us to. For queer people interested in careers in STEAM, there are some tried and true approaches to making the right steps, like following the right recipe to get access. In what I've seen across a wide array of students, it comes down to basically like three things. The first is doing well and diversifying your training across curriculum. So making sure that if you're interested in primarily, let's say, physics and math, you need to build your mathematics skills and your programming skills as broadly as possible now. And that needs to happen before you would start to pursue a degree program in college. Because I think that currently these are expectations people have at the best institutions for students that come into that track. And the queer people who are interested in that, they probably already know that. So that's kind of falling on deaf ears. But that's very different than students that are interested, for example, in biology and possibly doing some kind of biology chemistry intersection, which ultimately comes down to research experience. That is the catapult. That really is what shoots you off into the most opportunities. Research experience can come at the biotech level. You can get internships that allow you to work on research and development, for example. Or you could do a traditional research internship in someone's lab at another institution. So diversifying the environments in which you work is another way to gain access into multiple career paths. So I see undergraduates look for the best research opportunities at professional companies rather than sticking within academia per se. Some academic programs, though, for instance, material science, they tend to couple with or partner with companies such as 3M or HP. And so by working in that person's lab as an undergraduate, you get access to the R&D side of companies. So there's lots of really cool ways to get in. So think about what are the pathways in, and that's something to just really focus on. And then the last thing is that I cannot understate the value of mentorship. Finding someone who is successful, visible, and representative of what you think is optimal. What's the best career path sound like to you? You have a world of options. You don't have to decide on just one. You can pick 3, you can pick 10, right? So sit down and dream up what you think sounds like the coolest thing to do. Maybe if you're an artist, you can sketch out what your career really looks like. How does it begin? What do you see yourself doing by the time you're 30? What does it look like by the time you're 40? And then start to hone in on the major things that you can read about that make those people successful. All of this is at your fingertips through Google. It's very easy to find advice about professional career paths in, let's say, data security. How did these people get to where they are? People tell their stories all over the place. It's super easy to find. And people are really accessible now through social media. So sending someone a DM, very easy. Hi, I have a professional question for you. I was wondering if you'd be willing to exchange some messages with me about advice for career stuff. So many people love to talk about their careers and how they got to where they are. So I think that you have a lot more power than you would anticipate. The fear of rejection, of not being paid attention to. I don't have enough followers to be taken seriously, because of Instagram or whatever. This is sort of self-toxic thinking, rather than taking this minimal risk, sending an email, sending a message, whatever. That's minimal, takes no time, and you'll be surprised at the results. So I think that that's a power you can find within yourself that can yield some pretty awesome outcomes. We've started these mentor networks for underrepresented scientists in my scientific society that I'm a member of. And that relationship network has enabled up and coming scientists within our discipline to learn tradecraft. What are some key pieces of advice you would give to someone who's about to be on the job market, right? I mean, this is invaluable feedback, invaluable. And so I just would really, really encourage young queer people to not rely on just their own assessment of what's out there. That's a great starting point. You cannot rely only on that, though. Not everybody is John Waters, for example, right? And John Waters was extremely well read. So he learned things by reading books from famous queer people. right? People who he aspired to be like, people who he respected. Allow as much information in other words. I think that's vital in STEAM. Allowing people to educate you and guide you will save you a lot of heartache if you try to learn their lessons yourself. So.
You know, I can't remember who said it. I did hear Barack Obama say this. He said, it's hard to believe that you can be something that you can't see. And I think that's so true. And that's why role models are so important.